Hello students, this is the lesson video for lesson 2.04 and we'll be going over the element carbon and how it's so important for life. So here's a general overview about what we'll be going over today. We'll be going over the structure of carbon atoms and how they have 4 valence electrons. Remember that electrons are found on the outside of the nucleus, and the valence electrons specifically are the electrons that are found in the outer ring. Those valence electrons we'll see today allow for carbon to readily bond to other atoms in order to form organic compounds. So the goals for today's lesson is that you'll be able to describe the importance of carbon and carbon compounds to living things. You'll be able to describe the role of carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, and nucleic acids, as well as water to living things. You'll be able to recognize that organic compounds are compounds that contain carbon, and that carbon atoms are really the building blocks of molecules that are essential for life. And lastly, you'll be able to recognize that carbon's ability to combine or bond with other atoms really makes it unique. So let's first talk about organic compounds in general. So organic compounds, very simply, are compounds that contain carbon and are essential for life. So whether you're looking at any of these different animals or even a baby, all of these organisms contain carbon. Carbon atoms really are the building blocks of every molecule that is essential to living organisms. Carbon-based molecules that are present in living things are what we call organic compounds. Okay, so again, 2 things about organic compounds. They contain carbon. Another thing important about organic compounds is that they are essential for life. So before we go over how carbon really has properties that make it unique to bonding to many different other atoms, it's important to talk about the stability of an atom in general. So atoms, they bond, and the reason why they bond is because it makes them more stable. And let's talk about why they do this. So atoms have electrons. Remember, electrons are not found in the nucleus, but they actually orbit or go around the nucleus. And those electrons actually move at different levels. So for example, you see there's like an inner level right here, and there's an outer level right here that surrounds this sodium atom. Here's a new twist though. Each level can only hold a certain number of electrons. So the first level can only hold 2 electrons. Most other atoms can hold up to 8 electrons in their outer levels. An atom is not stable until its outer level contains the maximum number of electrons. So if an atom only has 1 level, then the maximum would be 2. But if it has more than 1 level, then the outer level would have the maximum of 8 electrons. And an atom is not stable until it reaches that maximum. If the outer level of an atom holds fewer than the maximum number of electrons, then the atom will undergo changes until its outer level is full. So again, to remember, what it means to be full or reach the maximum would be 2 electrons for that first level, or any other level would be 8 electrons. After that happens, the atom is considered more stable. So table salt, which is sodium chloride, forms from an ionic bond. Remember, that's a bond where we're either giving or losing electrons between sodium and chlorine atoms. So if we look right here, we see that sodium bonds with chloride, and at the end of it, both atoms have 8 electrons in their outer level. You can count them right here and also right here. So before they actually formed that ionic bond, sodium had 1 electron in its outer level, and chloride actually had 7. And so the easiest way to make both of these atoms stable is if sodium actually loses 1, right, because its next level already has 8, and chloride actually gains 1. If chloride gains 1, then that would make it 8 valence electrons on the outside, making it stable. So now that we know how atoms bonding with other atoms make it more stable, let's go ahead and look at carbon specifically. Carbon is really unique because of its bonding abilities. So when you were younger, you probably played with a set of building blocks, and oftentimes if you were to build like a house or even a train or a car, you would often have some sort of base, and from that base you would start building off of it. So carbon is kind of like those base building blocks. Carbon has 4 valence electrons. So remember, we want 8 electrons in that outer ring, so it has 4 available spaces for bonding. It can accept 4 more electrons because it wants to reach that 8. Carbon can easily form 4 covalent bonds. Remember, that's a bond where you're sharing electrons with other atoms, including other carbon atoms. So a single carbon atom can bond covalently with 4 hydrogen atoms, for example, to form a methane molecule, which is CH4. Carbon has those 4 empty spaces for valence electrons. Hydrogen, on the other hand, has only 1 empty space for valence electrons, so it makes a perfect fit. So if you look here, these blue circles right here are the electrons, right? The valence electrons. You see hydrogen each has 1. Carbon has 4. Remember, valence electrons are the ones that are on the outer ring. Hydrogen only has that 1 ring, and so hydrogen wants to have 2 electrons in order for it to be stable. Carbon wants to have 8 because it has, again, an outer ring, so it wants to reach that maximum of 8 electrons. So in order for all of the atoms here to be stable, what can happen is the hydrogen can bond, each hydrogen can bond with this carbon molecule, and in the end what you see is here, hydrogen shares that electron with carbon, giving it 8 on the outer ring. Carbon shares its electrons with hydrogen, giving it 2 electrons on its outer ring, which again are both of the maximums for those atoms, making it stable. Scientists have different ways of representing these atoms and the chemical compounds that they form. And so here you see in these 2 pictures 2 different ways that chemical compounds can be represented. For example, here you can have it written where we have each black line representing a bond, or as we know, because it's a covalent bond, it's shared electrons. Okay, so each black line represents a shared electron pair. Here you see on the bottom, we don't have just 1 black line, but we have 2 of them. And the reason why this is because we have 2 pairs of shared electrons in each covalent bond, and we call that a double bond. So you can see the 2 pairs right here being shared. versus up here we only have one pair, one pair, one pair, and one pair, and that's why it only has a single line. Okay, now in this next section, we're going to be talking about different macromolecules that are essential for life and how carbon plays a role in all of those macromolecules. So carbon can bond to form different shaped molecules. So we see here carbon can form a straight chain, can form a branched chain, and it also can form a ring. And this is really essential when trying to make a variety of different macromolecules and organic compounds that are essential for life. But what you do see in all of these examples is that each carbon molecule has 4 bonds, because remember it has those 4 valence electrons, so it has the ability to make 4 bonds with other atoms. So we see here 1, 2, 3, 4. We could even check this one. 1, 2, 3, 4. This one right here, the same thing. 1, 2, 3, 4. Or even this one right here. 1, 2, 3, 4. All of the carbon atoms that are shown here have 4 bonds that they make in order to be stable. 4 large carbon-based molecules, which are known as macromolecules, are present in all living things. And those 4 that we're going to be talking about are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. So first let's talk about carbohydrates. So carbohydrates, some examples of them would be plants. All carbohydrates actually contain carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms that are bonded together by valence electrons. So we see here lots of carbon, hydrogens, as well as oxygen molecules. So again, another example of carbohydrates would be something like potatoes. It is loaded with a carbohydrate called starch, and each starch molecule is actually made up of smaller carbohydrates, which we call glucose. So essentially what starch is are many glucose molecules bonded together. Rice, bread, pasta, French fries, any of these plant-based foods contain carbohydrates. What's really interesting about these carbohydrates is that when you eat these foods, your body actually uses a very complex process to turn these carbohydrates into a useful energy, which we'll talk about as well, and that's called cellular respiration. Another macromolecule that carbon is involved in is called lipids, which is another word for fat. You may have a negative association with the word fat, but really without fats you couldn't function. Every cell in your body is surrounded by a cell membrane that's made mostly of fats called phospholipids. Your nerves are insulated with fats, which helps protect it and allows messages to be sent quickly. And your body stores that extra energy in the form of fat. So fat is extremely important in order to maintain life. A basic unit of many lipids is a molecule called glycerol, which you can see right here, and glycerol contains carbon. Carbon's unique bonding ability allows it to make bonds with either other carbon molecules or with oxygen molecules and hydrogen molecules. The next macromolecule that carbon's involved in is proteins. So many structures in your body are made up of proteins. And actually each protein is made up of molecules called amino acids. So if you were to say that each of these circles right here were amino acids, then a chain of amino acids is what we would consider proteins. And if we look closely at the structure of an amino acid, then we would see that there are many carbon molecules present in amino acids. Amino acids are present in muscle tissue, hair, blood, digestive enzymes, and many other parts of your body. So again, carbon extremely important in the structure of amino acids, which are the smaller subunits of proteins. And lastly, the last macromolecule that carbon is involved in is nucleic acids. So all of your genetic material, the material in your body that determines the color of your eyes and hair, your bone structure, and all your other physical characteristics are made up of molecules called nucleic acids. And the two main types of nucleic acids are called DNA and RNA. Molecules like adenine are nucleotides or the smaller subunits of DNA and other nucleic acids. And you can see that right here. Again, nucleic acids are essentially the important component of all genetic material in living organisms. So we talked a lot about carbon and how it's essential for life, but carbon can also be found in inorganic compounds or compounds that are not living. So some really familiar inorganic compounds made of carbon are fossil fuels like natural gas, coal, and oil. Carbon monoxide, which you know as CO, is a poisonous gas that is emitted when all of these fuels burn. If you think about a diamond, that's made up of pure carbon, or the graphite in an ordinary pencil is also made up of pure carbon. So because of its 4 valence electrons, carbon really is able to bond in so many unique ways, which allows it to be involved in so many different aspects of life and also non-living compounds as well. So carbon's a really important molecule, an atom for living things. However, there is a limited supply of carbon on Earth. So we're going to go ahead and watch this video to learn how carbon dioxide is absorbed from the atmosphere by plants and then passed on as carbon compounds to humans and animals, which then release carbon dioxide back to the atmosphere. So we'll be looking at this cycle in this video.
The element carbon is essential for plants and animals to survive. But there's a limited supply of carbon here on Earth. It's recycled by a series of reactions known as the carbon cycle. The atmosphere contains a small amount of carbon dioxide. CO2 in the air is constantly being absorbed by plants. They use it for photosynthesis. Carbon dioxide diffuses into the leaves, where it's built up into sugars and other complex carbon compounds. When a plant is eaten, the carbon compounds are passed on to the animal. Both plants and animals respire. This process returns carbon to the atmosphere in the form of carbon dioxide. Another part of the carbon cycle involves decomposition. When living things die, they decompose. The carbon they contain is returned to the soil and the air. Forest fires and the burning of fossil fuels also return carbon to the atmosphere.
So here's a summary of what we went over today. We talked about how carbon plays a central role in the molecules of all living things, specifically because it makes up organic compounds. Carbon has 4 valence electrons, but remember it needs 8 to be stable. So it has 4 available spaces for electrons in its outer shell, and so that allows the carbon atom to easily form covalent bonds with common atoms like hydrogen and oxygen. This makes carbon extremely versatile, so it is often the base element or backbone in a chemical compound. We looked at different organic compounds, specifically macromolecules that carbon's involved in, like proteins, fats, carbohydrates, and nucleic acids. We also talked about at the end how carbon is involved in non-living things, like different types of fuels. Or we talked about diamonds, etc. Some important vocabulary that you'll need to know from this lesson are organic compounds, macromolecules, carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, amino acids, and lastly, nucleic acids.